Some men leave behind fortune, others leave behind silence. But this father, he left behind something no one could see, until the day the truth echoed through the halls of the very school he mopped every night. If you find value in real stories told with clarity and truth, make sure to subscribe to stay informed with Real Father Stories. Every morning before the first bell rang, and while the world was still asleep, Carl Dawson unlocked the back gate of Crestmont Academy, the most prestigious private school in the state. Dressed in his faded blue uniform and worn-out boots, he swept the courtyard in silence, letting the rhythm of the broom in the wind be his only company. He wasn't just a janitor. He was the invisible thread that held the school together, fixing leaky pipes, before the principal ever noticed, picking up crumpled notes. Students never meant anyone to read, and nodding politely at teachers who didn't remember his name. Carl never complained. Not when the heaters broke down in the dead of winter. Not when students laughed as they tossed gum wrappers right where he had just cleaned. Not even when they looked through him as if he didn't exist. Because Carl had a secret, one that walked through the school's gates every morning at 8:15 a.m., dressed in a sharp uniform carrying a sleek laptop bag with hair combed just right. His name was Ethan, Carl's son, but no one knew, and Carl intended to keep it that way. He'd promised Ethan's mother before she passed that he'd give their son every chance she never had. So he worked 2 jobs, took night shifts, and sold their old house to pay the tuition. He pulled every string to get Ethan admitted without anyone suspecting the boy's last name had anything to do with the man pushing the mop. And Ethan never called him Dad at school. That was the deal. Carl would watch from a distance, never speaking, never interfering. He'd catch glimpses Ethan answering questions, in class winning awards, even making friends with the children of CEOs and senators. Carl was proud, but sometimes when the halls emptied and he sat alone in the cleaning closet, he'd whisper to himself, "Just a few more years. Let him rise. Let him be free of my shadow." Carl believed that his silence was love. He never imagined it would someday be broken in front of the entire school. Carl wiped down the cafeteria tables with precision, always starting from the farthest corner and working toward the windows. It was a routine, something stable in a world that constantly shifted. But that morning, something was off. Whispers floated down the halls. Teachers huddled together with uncertain eyes. Even the headmaster's voice, normally loud and decisive, cracked as he announced all students and staff are to gather in the assembly hall in 30 minutes. Carl didn't ask questions. He never did. He simply adjusted his gloves and kept scrubbing until the benches gleamed. Later, when the hall filled, he stood in the shadows as he always did. The announcement was about Crestmont Academy's future. A new investor, a changing of hands. Someone had purchased the school, the entire campus, in full. Most of the staff expected a corporate group or a billionaire philanthropist. Instead, the side door opened, and a tall young man stepped through in a crisp navy suit. Carl dropped the mop. It was Ethan, only not the boy he'd raised. This Ethan stood taller, spoke smoother, and walked like he owned the room because, as it turned out, he did. The new owner of Crestmont Academy was none other than Ethan Dawson, tech entrepreneur, early investor in a major e-learning platform, and a name that had just made Forbes' 30 under 30. The crowd erupted in applause. Teachers looked at each other in disbelief. Students stared wide-eyed. Ethan gave a poised, charming speech about legacy education and opportunity. Carl's hands trembled as he stood in the back, hidden behind a curtain. He hadn't seen Ethan in almost 3 years. Not since the boy left home after college, eager to build a life without charity or fatherly strings, as he once put it during their last argument. Ethan had refused to take money anymore, not that Carl had much left. The house was gone. The car sold. Carl still lived in a small room behind the school's maintenance shed, but as Ethan ended his speech and began to thank the figures who shaped his values, something shifted. He paused, then turned toward the back of the room, eyes scanning, until they landed on Carl. There was a long silence. Then Ethan said slowly but clearly, "Before anyone else, I want to thank the man who taught me dignity, who cleaned these halls with more integrity than most run corporations, who sacrificed his name so I could build mine." The hall was silent, and then he added, "Thank you, Dad." Gasps echoed. Carl stood frozen, and for the first time in his life at Crestmont Academy, everyone was looking at him, not with pity, not with dismissal, but with awe. For a long moment, Carl didn't move. He felt every pair of eyes fixed on him, teachers, students, board members, even the headmaster who had barely acknowledged his presence over the years. His old hands clenched the mop handle, unsure whether to drop it or hold tighter. Then Ethan took a step forward. "Please," he said softer this time, "come stand with me." Carl blinked. The world felt blurry, like someone had dipped the moment in watercolors. Slowly, unsure of his legs, he stepped out from behind the curtain. The mop clattered to the ground, forgotten. As he walked down the aisle, a hush fell over the room. Some of the older faculty began to murmur. Others just stared. Ethan met him halfway. They didn't hug, not yet, not like in the movies, but they looked at each other, really looked. Carl saw the same eyes he used to peer into during late-night homework sessions, the same hands that once scraped knees in the driveway learning to ride a bike. And Ethan, he saw wrinkles etched not just by age, but by sacrifice. Ethan raised the mic again. "Some of you know me as a business owner or a tech guy," he said. "But what most of you don't know is I wouldn't be here without the man who used to go hungry just to make sure I had lunch money, who cleaned toilets so I could stay enrolled, who slept in his truck when rent was overdue." A teacher near the front gasped. Carl wanted to shrink away. His shame had been a silent shadow his whole life. But Ethan wasn't done. "You all see a janitor, but I see my father and the reason I own this school today." He turned to Carl, eyes glistening. "You gave me everything, Dad, and I never said thank you the way I should have." Then, breaking all formality, Ethan pulled Carl into an embrace, tight, real trembling. For the first time, Carl let the tears come. He didn't care who was watching. The applause began hesitantly, and then surged. A standing ovation. Students clapped. Faculty wept. The board chair removed his glasses to wipe his eyes. In that moment, Carl Dawson, once invisible, stood at the center of the world he had silently kept afloat. He didn't ask for it, but for the first time in his life, he was seen. And it wasn't because of what he had, but because of who he had been all along. After the ceremony, Carl thought it would all go back to normal. He returned to his modest break room, changed out of his uniform, and tried to slip out through the side gate. He figured Ethan had done his part, a public thanks, a powerful gesture, and that was enough. But he was wrong. Waiting for him outside was a car sleek black, and definitely not from the parking lot he used. Ethan was leaning against it, still in his suit, but with his tie loosened, looking more like the boy Carl used to know than the man who had just purchased the very school he once mopped. "Thought you might try to run," Ethan said with a smile. Carl shook his head, still not used to this. "Didn't want to take away your spotlight." Ethan stepped forward, serious now. "You never took anything. You gave, and I've barely started returning what I owe." He reached into the car and pulled out a slim envelope. It was heavy. Too heavy to just be a thank you note. Carl opened it and stared. It wasn't just a check. It was a deed. "To the house you always wanted," Ethan said quietly. "It's yours. No mortgage. No tricks." Carl's knees nearly buckled. "I can't accept this," he whispered. "You worked for this, not me." Ethan took a breath. "Dad, I worked because you believed in me when no one else did. Every late-night job you took, every coat you didn't buy, so I could have one, that was your investment. You just never got the return until now." Carl clutched the paper in trembling hands. "I used to dream," he admitted, voice cracking, "that one day you'd see me as more than just the janitor who raised you." Ethan looked him dead in the eyes. "I always did. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was sacred. For the first time in decades, Carl wasn't holding back tears. He let them fall. He had carried the weight of invisibility for so long, and suddenly, the world, or at least one person in it, had looked straight through it and found value. As Ethan helped him into the car, Carl realized something he hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not in what he did, but in who he was. And that kind of pride, it doesn't wear off. The new house was everything Carl never allowed himself to imagine. A porch with room for 2 chairs. A quiet street where the only sirens were from distant trains. And in the backyard, an orange tree, just like the one his own father had planted long ago in a place Carl hadn't spoken of in years. Ethan had thought of everything. Even the small shed out back was stocked with tools Carl once lost to pawn shops when times got desperate. He moved in slowly, almost cautiously, as if afraid the dream would vanish if he unpacked too fast. For the first time, Carl had keys to something that was fully his. He slept without his shoes on. He woke up without the fear of missing an early shift. But then something unexpected happened. Carl started to feel useless. No schedules, no alarms, no uniform to press, and no floors to shine. He wandered the halls of his new house like a ghost of his old life. The pride he felt on day 1 began to erode under the silence of day 4. There were only so many plants to water, only so many news channels to watch before they all blended into noise. Then, on a rainy Thursday, Ethan showed up again unannounced, just like he used to after college exams. "Dad," he said gently, "I didn't just want you to rest. I wanted you to live." Carl chuckled. "And what does living look like for a washed-up school janitor?" Ethan didn't laugh. Instead, he pulled out a folder. "I bought more than the school you know. I also bought the building next door. And I want to open something in it, a mentorship center. For kids who come from places like I did, like we did." He handed Carl the papers inside. "I want you to help run it." Carl blinked. "Me, I haven't run anything but a mop in 40 years. Ethan smiled. "Exactly. That's why you'll know how to talk to them." The moment hung in the air, heavy, humbling. Carl sat back in the armchair, stunned. He wasn't just being rescued. He was being reinstated as a man with value, with purpose, and with something to offer beyond hard labor. This time, the uniform wouldn't be polyester. It would be respect. The mentorship center opened with little fanfare, no ribbon cutting, no press. Just a dusty old sign that read, "Second Start." Carl smiled when he saw it. The name felt right. It was honest. He arrived early every morning, just like he used to. But this time, he wasn't holding a mop. He held a clipboard, a smile, and stories. Teenagers shuffled in, some angry, some indifferent, some just hungry. Carl knew that look. He'd worn it for most of his life. So he didn't lecture. He listened. He told them about nights he slept on benches, about how shame tastes when it's all you've got for dinner. And slowly, they started opening up. But then on a Tuesday that felt like any other, he saw a face that froze his breath. Marcus, the boy who used to tag the back hallway. The one Carl had once chased down and scolded for stealing cafeteria trays. Now older, broader eyes, harder, but unmistakably him. Carl cleared his throat. "You here to make trouble or turn the page?" Marcus tilted his head. "That depends. You still swing that mop like a bat?" A pause. Then they both laughed. It broke something open. Marcus sat down. And Carl told him the truth he never shared before about being kicked out of high school at 15. About working under fake names because no one would hire a dropout. About hiding his tears behind just allergies. And Marcus, who had never heard a grown man say those words without flinching, just nodded. "I thought you were just some angry old janitor," he said. Carl smiled. "I was, but I also used to be you." For the first time, Marcus stayed the whole session. And the next day, he brought 2 friends. By the end of the week, Second Start had a wait list. Carl wasn't just a figurehead. He was the reason these kids showed up. And when Ethan passed by the window, that Friday briefcase in hand, phone pressed to his ear, he stopped for just a second. He watched his father surrounded by kids, leaning in to listen, and he smiled. Because this was legacy. Not the buildings, not the bank accounts, but the man who once cleaned the floor, now helping others rise from it. It was nearly midnight when Carl found the envelope. He was cleaning out an old filing cabinet Ethan had sent over from the office boxes of archived paperwork, old yearbooks, yellowed newsletters from the school's early days. The envelope had no name, no stamp, just a single word written on it in Ethan's neat, careful handwriting, "Open when you need it most." Carl stared at it for a long time. He wasn't sure what needing it most even meant anymore. He wasn't starving. He wasn't angry. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's story. Still, he opened it. Inside was a letter. Short, typed, almost clinical. But it shook him. "Dad, I don't remember much about being little, but I remember this. You always showed up, even when you had nothing. I was angry for years because I thought success had to look a certain way. I didn't understand that it can look like sweat, silence, and sacrifice. You gave up everything for me. This school, this foundation, I didn't build it alone. I built it from your footsteps. I love you." Ethan. Carl folded the letter with trembling hands. And for the first time since his wife's funeral, for the first time in over 2 decades, he let himself cry. Not from pain, but from being seen. He realized something, then something big. That the truest kind of fatherhood isn't about what you give, but what you become so your child can believe in themselves. And Ethan had believed, because Carl had kept sweeping, kept showing up, kept being the man he wished he'd had growing up. Carl placed the letter in his coat pocket close to his chest. He stood up, walked out onto the quiet school campus, and looked up at the stars, the same ones he used to stare at on the long walk home after night shifts. Only now they didn't feel so far. Graduation day arrived with a smell of fresh flowers and the buzz of hopeful futures. Carl wasn't working that day. He wasn't on the schedule. But he came anyway, not with a mop, but with a pressed shirt, a tie too wide for modern fashion, and shoes he'd polished until his fingers ached. He stood in the back of the hall watching rows of students in navy gowns cross the stage, clutching diplomas like golden tickets. Proud parents filled the seats. Flashbulbs popped. The crowd erupted again and again with applause. Then Ethan stepped onto the stage, now the official chairman of the school board, the youngest in its history. He wasn't holding a speech. He was holding Carl's broom. The room fell into a stunned hush. This, Ethan began lifting the broom high, was the first thing I ever saw my father carry with pride. He turned to the students. "You've all worked hard. You've sacrificed. Some of you had every resource. Some of you had none. But whatever you had, someone somewhere sacrificed quietly to get you here. Maybe a parent, maybe a neighbor, maybe a janitor who walked 12 miles a night to buy your secondhand textbooks." He looked straight at Carl. "My father cleaned this school for 30 years. And while I used to think he was just a janitor, I know now he was building a future I couldn't yet see." Gasps. Tears. A few stunned professors lowered their cameras. Ethan continued. "Today I don't just want to celebrate you, I want to honor him. So I'm renaming this school." A giant banner dropped from the rafters behind him. The Carl Winters Academy of Purpose. The hall erupted. Students stood. Professors clapped. Some cried. And in the back of the room, Carl, the man who'd never graduated from anything, stood taller than he ever had before. Not because of the name, but because someone had finally called him what he always was, a builder of lives. If this story moved you or opened your eyes, don't forget to hit like, leave a comment, and share this report with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe for more true stories at Real Father Stories.